Hello, welcome back to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for the Milner and Musgrove show with me, Andrew Musgrove, and him, Sam Milner. Today, we're going to have a deep dive into the issues on the wings at Newcastle United. Sam, welcome back to the podcast. How are you keeping? You well?
Yes, good. It's been a busy few weeks, but which has been good and really enjoyable. But yeah, back to a bit of normality now.
Well, look, after the doom and gloom of two successive defeats on the road for Newcastle United, we're bringing everyone hopefully a bit of light relief as you come back on to the show.
I doubt
That
it.
will only last a few moments as we get into the issue with the wingers. What are we calling this one, Sam?
I don't know, but it's gutting really the way the season's panning out. 'Cause obviously, I haven't been on with you for a few weeks for one reason or another, and well, work commitments elsewhere. But I messaged you a few weeks back saying that we were sleepwalking into a bottom half finish, and that is very much the case. The League Cup and the Champions League have covered up a multitude of sins, really, and it's gutting. I'm not angry about it. I'm just frustrated, sure, particularly in the last two games because they were pretty much as bad as it gets. Particularly under Eddie Howe, and yeah, it's not nice to see because we looked out of ideas and some new signings haven't fired. Some players are really underperforming, and some of the in-game management and the decisions being made are just baffling. So it's a whole multitude of sins that are just completely destroying our league campaign. I remember the last international break where we said we'd go unbeaten. I mean, we were right for the home games, but then you think all those away games were there to be won. They were there to be won if good enough, and we've not been good enough in any way. I don't think we've been good enough in the league at all. Pretty much every game all season. Those three wins we've got, two of whom are against the bottom three, who have since both changed their manager, and the other one was Fulham, where we really had to battle and just scraped a win that we maybe didn't entirely deserve. But yeah, I think the whole point of this show, as you say, to look at the wingers, and they're obviously a big feature of our success down the recent years, and they are all bar one underperforming. It's incredible that we're 4 years into the Eddie Howe reign, so just over 4 years post takeover, and our top performing winger is still the guy that was bought for 12 million by Rafa Benitez, who we've been trying to replace for 6 years.
Yeah, it is quite something. Before we take a look at the wingers, lots of debate, lots of conversation about Eddie Howe. Still the man for you to lead Newcastle United into the future?
Yeah, he's got credit in the bank. I think he'll get to the end of the season, whatever happened. Some of that credit has been used. He's not had any favours done above him, so there's responsibility to take there. It's took way too long to get the new director of football and the CEO in place. That took way too long. The summer was a mess, and that wasn't all down to Howe. We can debate till the cows come home that I wasn't a fan of a few of the signings that we made, but I was a fan of the Jacob Ramsey signing, and he's one of those that haven't performed yet. So yeah, obviously with about wingers, we'll talk about Alanga, who's been so disappointing, but he's not the main he's not the main culprit, but he's been dropped because of his poor form, and again Murphy has succeeded him and has outlasted St Maximin, Almiron. He just, I mean, it's not a shame England have Saka, Foden, and Palmer. It's a shame for Jacob Murphy because then he might have had an England call up as well. But I see a lot of issues or a lot of things about Burn and Pope. But we've scored 11 goals in the league all season. Only three teams have scored fewer. Two of those in the bottom three. The other is Leeds, I think. It's the service Voltamada has been getting. It is a miracle he has scored the goals he has. It is a miracle because he has had no service whatsoever. And if he hadn't have scored those goals, we'd be in the bottom three.
Well, I've got some stats for you just to kind of back up that point that you've made. So I'll run through some names, and then these are the stats overall in all competitions for these wingers. So we'll start with Jacob Murphy. Number of goals this season, 2. Number of assists this season, 3. Chances created, 10. Successful crosses, 7. Anthony Gordon, number of goals this season, 4. Number of assists this season, 1. Chances created, 11. Successful crosses, 5. Harvey Barnes, number of goals, 4. Number of assists, 2. Chances created, 10. Successful crosses, 9. Alanga, number of goals, number of assists, 0. Chances created, 16. Successful crosses, 13. So I've got my verdict on those numbers. What do you make of those numbers, Sam?
I think those numbers are generous because they are in all competitions. Anthony Gordon has not scored for Newcastle United in the Premier League since January. Anthony Gordon has not had an assist in the Premier League for Newcastle United since January. He's missed 5 games through suspension for 2 red cards, one of which was in the FA Cup. And obviously one game that he missed was the cup final. Again, Harvey Barnes has been brilliant off the bench in the Champions League. The only kind of stat there that holds any real water is Jacob Murphy's. But again, four wingers, all in excess of, well, 3 of which way in excess of, 40 odd million. How much was Barnes? It was knocking on 40 with add-ons and all that. Gordon knocking on 50, Alanga 55. Eesh. It's not good for the stats don't read good for players of that value. Gordon's had a couple of very good appearances in the Champions League. Having said that, against Bilbao, had he not been taken off through injury, I'm pretty certain he would have been hooked at halftime. He was stinking the place out, and we looked a lot better when he went off. And yeah, Alanga just hasn't looked comfortable since the moment he signed. I mean, you could say Gordon needed 6 months when he came in, but that was again through January, and Alanga was the first through the door. He had the benefit of a full pre-season. I don't know. You're probably. I don't know. He just hasn't looked the same player that he did for Forest. It's really concerning.
Yeah, we'll get on to Alanga in a moment, but I guess those numbers that we've spoken about there kind of leads into the point you were making about Voldemort. You know, a lot of discussion about whether he's in his best position. I don't think he is. I think he needs that centre forward to play off, but at the moment, Eddie Howe doesn't have that option. But the other side of that argument is that even if you had someone there, is he getting the service? And I think the majority of people would argue he's definitely not getting helped out by his wingers.
No, and the whole coming deep thing, I don't think he's. Newcastle want him to be a number 9. His national team are desperate for him to be a number 9 because they've got number 10s coming out of their backside. They haven't got a number 9, so they are just as desperate for him to be a success as an out-and-out striker as Newcastle are. I think he's done well. The point of him dropping deep is something that Harry Kane does for Bayern Munich, but then he can pass it out wide or he can pass it to a midfield who have also been lacking this season. Joe Linton has been absolutely appalling in the main. And then he can make his. But the difference with Kane is that he's got quality wingers around him that are doing the business at the moment, midfield, spreading the play out in wide, and then he can get back in the box to score. Voltemada hasn't had that opportunity because he's not getting the service, and when he has, he's taking it. I mean, his chance to goal conversion rate is astounding. So yeah, I can see the argument for playing him at number 10, and I think that may well happen as and when Visser is fit. Don't get me started on that guy. But the wing play has been so crucial to us over the years. When you think when Almiron had his purple patch in the season we finished 4th, so crucial. Gordon a couple of seasons ago was absolutely flying. Obviously Murphy last season, but the difference was it wasn't just one standout; others were contributing for the greater success. And it's only really Murphy. Again, Barnes has had good numbers, but most of those have come not in the league. Same as Gordon. That was his first goal of the season, wasn't it? at Brentford, first league goal. So it's, yeah, at the moment, I'm fully convinced that the only way we are getting European football next year is through a cup competition.
I'm not even sure of that, to be quite honest. But that's the best route, I guess, is the point you
Yeah,
make.
that's what I mean. That's the only way, because the league form is so abhorrent, and it was all bunched up before, but there is a gap emerging now, and that needs to be closed. Like, again, it's pretty well publicised now. We haven't won away since Leicester.
Yeah, not good enough at all. Just to put in some context about those stats that I provided. So if you're looking just in the Premier League for the players who've created the most chances this season so far, Bruno Fernandes is top of the list with 29, Jack Grealish second with 24, Jeremy Doku third, 23, Foden 21 in fourth, and Cody Gakpo fifth with 21. I mean, even Sean Longstaff is on that list. He's ninth in the list with 18 chances created in the Premier
But
League.
he was the problem, Andrew. He was the scapegoat. Sean Longstaff wasn't good enough.
There we go. But you can see there, just with those numbers, how far off the pace Newcastle United are, because the stats that I give you guys was in all competitions. So 3 competitions there to get just into double figures for the likes of Murphy, Gordon and Barnes. So if we look at the Premier League, it doesn't make for pretty reading at all. And the other interesting thing as well, because obviously we've talked about Voldemort and not getting the service. If you look at the stats for accurate crosses per match, Wolverhampton Wanderers top the list, 6.3 per match. Now you might say, well, why are you talking about Wolves? They're even in a worse position than Newcastle United. But I think that's quite interesting considering who they've got up top. And they've got Strand Larson, and you would think, big man, what's the best way to get the best out of him? It's to get the ball in the box. And obviously, this isn't looking deep into our Wolves player, but it's an assumption that maybe that is what they're doing, and they're playing to Strand Larson's strengths. Now, if we talk about Voldemort, is his strength hanging on the last man? Is his strength being in the air, getting the balls into the box? I'm not too sure it is. Maybe it's a topic for another conversation, but just interesting there to see who does come top of that list when it is crosses per matches. Shall we dive into a bit more into players then? You've mentioned Gordon's stats and how he hasn't scored in, I think it's 19 or 20 games now in the Premier League. So it's obviously not a good read when you look at that. Does Eddie Howe have to be stronger when it comes to Anthony Gordon? Like, many people expected him not to feature against West Ham. Oh, no, sorry, not to feature against Bilbao after the performance against West Ham, and yet there he was. And I have to be honest, I think if he's fit enough to play against Man City, I think he'll start against Man City. I think even if he has a stinker against Man City, I would bet on him starting the next game, which is in the Champions League, and so on. I think he is actually one of those players where Eddie Howe just doesn't want to drop him because he's betting on it clicking in that game despite what's gone before.
Yeah, you could say he was fortunate, because he's obviously taken a Langer out of the firing line, and Murphy's took his chance. I mean, don't get me wrong, Murphy's not set the world alight, but again, he can't do it on his own. You can't rely on Jacob Murphy to fire you back into the Champions League on his own. He's done tremendously well for himself. He's a fantastic character and whatnot. He's just got better with age, hasn't he? But he needs help, and Anthony Gordon is England's first choice left winger. He hasn't justified that for Newcastle in the league so far. I mean, and again, the Champions League is probably misreading the form a little bit, because we've only beaten who we probably should be beating anyway. Bilbao have been pathetic this season in La Liga. Benfica are really struggling under Mourinho. Obviously, just not long come in replacing Bruno Lage, and Saint-Gilloise are really bizarre because they look like world beaters against Eindhoven, and then they just looked absolutely pathetic. But they've got a guy who was underperforming for Portsmouth in League One as their centre back. So, yeah, he is fortunate. I'm guessing Howe is counting on him to try and play himself back into form. But we've seen times where Howe has brought on Barnes to play on the right, which again we knew from last season doesn't really work. The balance is just all off, and then he's had times where he's put Murphy on the right and brought Elanga onto the left, which hasn't really worked. Some of his in-game decisions have been a bit bizarre and haven't worked, and if anything have made things worse, which I think was the case at West Ham, because I think West Ham was more concerning than Brentford, because that second half there was no identity, there was no clear plan, and that's not something we've said under Eddie Howe. And Brentford, obviously, you expect a reaction because that's what we've always sort of got before, but it was rinse and repeat. So that was a concern on that standpoint. But yeah, I don't know. Gordon obviously had. I don't know whether there were times where I watch Anthony Gordon and you think, well, he's maybe trying to do a bit too much instead of keeping it simple, which again, when you're struggling, I suppose back to basics and keeping things as simple as possible is a kind of good starting point. But yeah, he is a lucky boy when you've got Harvey Barnes there, who again, his numbers, stand up in all competitions and in recent history as well.
I think the issue for Eddie Howe in many ways is that when these players have been given their opportunity, they've rarely taken the chance that they've been handed. So Harvey Barnes obviously did against Brentford, a superb turn in finish, but far too often, we're impressed when he comes off the bench and he'll change a game or he'll get a goal. And then you say, wait, surely he's got to start here. And then he starts, and then it might work for one game, two games. But then after that, the third, fourth, fifth game, you're left scratching your head and thinking, where's that player that was here a few weeks ago? And you can argue the same to Murphy to a lesser degree. I mean, he's arguably the one who's the most informed, but he was shocking against Brentford, to be brutally honest. So, we can talk about the decisions Howe's making, but the responsibility also has to fall on the players. But I guess you have to look at the bigger picture, and it's about confidence. And right now, no one is looking happy. No one is looking comfortable. The confidence just isn't there, and that is clearly impacting the performance of whichever one of these wingers we want to talk about.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said there as well about Barnes and Murphy. And what we've got to remember as well, Murphy's no world beater. He's not world class, is he? Where you can look at a Botman, a Tonali, whatever. He's no world beater. So again, he's a player we've been trying to replace for years, and he's just kept plugging away, and you got to give him credit for that. But this team has, I don't want to use the word stagnated, but we haven't evolved. Can we honestly say that this team now is wholly better? I'm talking about the team, not the squad. The team is better than where we were a couple of seasons ago in the Champions League. The squad has. You can say the likes of Hall and Livramento have come on loads, but obviously Livramento's been a huge miss. Hall's been a huge miss, and that could be having an impact as well on the wingers, because obviously Burn and Trippier, less so Trippier, but obviously more so Burn, not as mobile. I think Howe is very reticent to drop down Burn because he doesn't want to sacrifice his England chances. But in doing so, he's harming Lewis Hall's, because Lewis Skelly isn't playing for Arsenal. That left back spot is up for grabs.
It's interesting you mentioned the fullbacks, because I put the question out to our listeners and viewers on X and said we were doing this episode. What have you made of the season so far for the wingers, and why is there such an issue? And quite a few people have come back and said, it's down, not overly, but down to kind of a little bit to do with the lack of fullbacks, or the lack of Lewis Hall and Tina Livramento, particularly. I'll just read through some of the comments. We've got James here saying they've been poor, but the fullbacks behind them have been a big part of that. Burn gives us all, but is limited at best as an attacking option, and Trippier doesn't exactly bomb on either anymore. Means there's less space, and the wingers get doubled up on consistently. Tonali says, without Hall and Tino on the overlaps, both sides have seriously struggled. If they had a 10, it might help, but they are seriously isolated and doubled up on too easily. And there's a few more comments along the same lines, and I agree with that. They haven't got the support of those fullbacks. Trippier is getting older, and I think what he's doing is he's choosing his battles, because he knows that when he goes down and attacks, it has to come off, and he doesn't want to do that too often because, if he loses the ball, it gets cleared, then he's struggling to get back up. I think Dan Burn just doesn't have that confidence. I think he knows he can't do it, and he does it maybe a little bit too often, and they'll get caught out. Obviously, when you've got a younger pair playing, that will benefit Newcastle United. But essentially, what we're missing, Sam, is that relationship that we have between Trippier and Miguel Almiron when he went through that purple patch, and that's what right now the wingers don't have with the fullbacks because of personnel, and time has caught up with the likes of Dan Burn and Kieran Trippier.
And you can say it on the opposite flank as well with likes of Joe Linton and Joe Willock. That was fantastic a few seasons ago. I think with the point with Trippier as well, because I still think Trippier is fantastic and there's a place for him next season. But at that age, playing 3 matches in 7 days, when asked to do that, bomb up and down for 90 minutes, you're not helping him out. I think I wouldn't say we've got an injury crisis this season. We've picked up some injuries, but every squad does. I wouldn't say we're at crisis point and haven't really been at crisis point for injuries. But I don't think the squad management has been what it should be or what should have been this season. So we're not making sensible changes. Particularly in the midfield, we're still very overly reliant. As I say, Joe Linton has underperformed so many games this season, but Jacob Ramsey got injured. When he's come back in, hasn't really done anything noteworthy. Lewis Miley's done all right in various roles, and Joe Willock hasn't really had a look in. Got an assist, didn't he, against Spurs in the Cup? But in the league hasn't really had a look in. And there's a player who needs to take his chance, or the chances are he's out the door in the summer. So I don't know. I was encouraged a little bit by Willock's performance against Spurs, but again, you don't want to live and die on that hill. But
that leads into the question that I will ask you in a moment, and I'll get onto that. But just on the fullbacks, do you think the performance of the wingers will improve once Lewis Hall and Tina Livramento are back fit and in the team?
No.
You don't?
Not
You don't
really.
think they're the solution?
Were they at the start of the season?
That's a good point. The question that I'm going to ask you next is about kind of the rotation and the squad management, because like you, I was really encouraged by Joe Willock, and I said actually against West Ham I would have played him because I felt he did so well against Spurs that he'd actually be flying high, and for me, you take Joe Linton out, and it also wasn't the right game for Joe Linton in my opinion. In the end, we know what the team was. The same against Brentford. I would have played one of Miley, Ramsey or Willock instead of Joe Linton, because I just don't think Joe Linton's on form, and I don't think it's the kind of game where you need Joe Linton. But a lot of people actually that got back to me on X made the point that the wingers need a consistent run of games. And it's quite an interesting point because obviously Eddie Howe's built a squad to handle 3 games in a week. But on the other hand of that argument, you do say, well, actually, how can Elanga find his feet, find his form, if he's not playing 3 or 4, 5 games in a row? And I get you make those decisions based on form, fitness, and also the opposition you're playing. But it's quite an interesting point, isn't it? I mean, he's never going to not rotate his side for the League Cup and the Champions League and the Premier League. I think you will struggle to see wingers consistently playing, but I can understand the argument to why that actually might need to happen to find a bit of form.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not after wholesale changes in between every game. I'm not saying he should have made 10 changes for Bilbao and then 10 changes back for Brentford. But just 1 or 2 here and there, just to take players out the firing line. He hasn't done Joe Linton any favours because again, he's out of form. He's still a very good player, but he's out of form. So take him out of the firing line. He did it with Elanga. Elanga had 4 run of games at the start of the season. He was absolutely pathetic, bar Barcelona, where he did well because of his pace, but had no end product. He put one. I think he put one good crossing, which really should have been converted. And then who knows? You get a monkey off your back, and he could maybe kick on. But in the league, it was frighteningly poor. That's the concern, and the same with Dan Burn. Should have been every single Newcastle fan knew watching that game against Brentford, Dan Burn needed to be hooked for the best for the team, and for him as well, for Dan Burn as well, because he was getting his backside handed to him, and he got away with one, and then right, he's on a yellow, take him off. You've got Lewis Hall on the bench. But to keep him on, and then to see what inevitably happened, which many could see coming. Ironically, I don't think the second one was a penalty, but there you go. I'd love to hear the VAR chat from that one, because they knew they effed up the first one. But it's a great equaliser, nevertheless. But yeah, Hull should have been brought on, or started. I mean, yes, Burn was coming off the back of scoring one of the best headers ever seen. How do you get Swaz off a header? But again, I think that Howe wants to keep him in the side so he, stays in the England setup.
But we've spoken a lot about the attacking nature of these wingers and how it's not coming off. Are they offering the protection going backwards? We know the limit of Dan Burn, and you could argue up until probably Sunday, Eddie Howe hasn't really had too much option other than to play him in that position, and he's been exposed quite a lot. I mean, West Ham was another fine example of where he was awful, to be quite honest with you. And you could ask the question to whether, are the wingers doing enough to protect, especially Dan Burn? And you might come back and say, well, actually, that's not what your wingers are for, but it's a team game, isn't it? You've got to make a sacrifice somewhere. I guess if you show up your left back area, then you're hoping somewhere down the line within that 90 minutes, you'll get the benefits going forward because you're not getting exploited at the back.
And that's where you want your left-sided midfielder to pull across and help out, like Gary Speed used to do back in the day, when Lauren Robert would gallivant off and not come back. They do come back and work. They do. Not every single occasion, but again, that's where your midfielders fill in and help out. This is what happens. I don't know. There's a lot of players out of form, and that's the biggest issue. I mean, you look ahead to January, which isn't far away, and I don't think we're any. I'd still be going in for the exact three positions that I said we needed in the summer, which is a centre mid, a winger, and a striker. I don't, and then that would free up to maybe change things. Maybe we've been found out. Maybe this 4-3-3 doesn't work anymore. Howe has flirted with various things, the back five, which made me feel physically sick at times, but could well work with Voltemada in a 10, and a striker off him. But I wouldn't be forcing that. I'm happy with Voltemada kind of plying his trade, learning his craft as a 9, because as I say, that's what we've bought him for, that's what we need him for, and that's what the German national squad want as well, because they haven't got a striker other than him. So 4-2-3-1 is an alternative, but again, it's a big risk changing it halfway through the season. Would fresh blood help, I wonder?
Potentially. I mean, it's funny, you think of that Brentford game and how devastating Atara was and what you would give for just one of our wingers to put in a performance like that. But just going back to the consistency point, do these wingers need a run of games, and does Eddie Howe just have to settle on a pair to play and stick with them and I hope it clicks that way?
Well, he's done that with Gordon, but it hadn't worked. Alanga had that chance at the start of the season, didn't work. It's why Howe and Tyndall are on the big books, and why we're talking about it on the internet. Those are the decisions that he will live and die from. So it's something that needs to change, and change very quickly, because obviously we come back to play City at home. They're playing very well at the moment. We've got a couple of good draws against them at St James's in recent years. If we can nick a point, is that a good result? Probably. Everton's going to be tricky away from home. all of a sudden, as well, especially given our away record, and all of a sudden you could be the consecutive losses or runs without a win are stacking up, and then we're in a bit of trouble.
Elanga then, because I know how in love with him I was, and I was buzzing that they signed him, and I stick by everything that I said. I still think he will prove to be a very good player for Newcastle United, but I'm not going to try and defend him in any way whatsoever. It's been a dreadful start to his time on Tyneside. I don't think he's been helped by some of the decisions being made. Like, I felt Sunday against Brentford, although Newcastle had the majority of possession, it was only by 3 or 4% when you look at the stats. That felt like a game that Elanga could potentially be quite dangerous in, especially how Brentford were pushing for a leveler and then a winner, and you just felt there was space there to be exploited. Why do you think it hasn't worked for Anthony Elanga? I mean, personally, I think he's trying too hard at times. I think you can tell that it's getting to him. He came on against Spurs in the Carabao Cup, and he had 2 or 3 opportunities down the flank, and you just couldn't trap a bag of cement. It was all over the shop, and I think that he looks like a player who's low on confidence. He looks like a player who's trying too hard, who knows there's this criticism, who's getting maybe impacted by the price tag. For you, what's the answer? What's the reason that it hasn't worked so far?
I don't think he's I don't think he's really been openly criticised. Certainly not by the mainstream, anyway, because that attention has been on the likes of Verts and players of the price tag of double Elanga. But I don't know. I think the moment was that Barcelona game. If Gordon or Barnes would have got on the end of some of the good work he was doing, because that's been his best performance, was Barcelona, because he's an absolute pace merchant, isn't he? That was the chance where he actually put in an okay cross or two, because in the Premier League it looks like he can't cross or pass or shoot, which is concerning. If only that first half, those good early chances we had at the Lees' end, if you remember, would have gone in and set us on our way, then things may have been different from there. He could have really kicked on.
Well, the Aston Villa game, if you'd taken that chance, could that be the difference?
Yeah. Like I say, these every game this season has been there for us to get something from. But I don't know. It's really concerning, because he's I didn't want. He wouldn't have been my pick to sign in the summer. Big deal. He's still a good player. He still had a fantastic campaign last season. It's just I don't know whether it's a tricky one, because maybe I was going to say maybe he needs that relationship with the right back, like he had with Aina. Was fantastic, wasn't he, for Forest? At that time, Livramento was playing left back, of course, and it was still Trippier at right back, who we mentioned. Does he have the legs 3 games in a week to really bomb on? He's got to pick his battles, as you say. I mean, Trippier's, like, as I mentioned earlier, I still think he's absolutely fantastic. But I don't know. Is there, again, like you mentioned before, that those little triangles that we had between Almiron and Trippier and Bruno would come across? Sometimes it would have been Longstaff. Those are a distant memory now. Those relationships on the pitch just aren't there, and it just all looks so disjointed. The midfield on paper is one of the best in Europe, but it's not performing as such. It looks like an individual 3, if you know what I mean. There's no real cohesion there, which again, those are the guys that are supplying the wingers, are supplying Voltemada, and they're the engine room. And if that's not clicking, there's so many elements to it that are of big concern, because you can sort of get away with these things at home and battle on against poor sides, which is what we've done. We've beaten a few poor sides this season. We haven't really beaten anyone other than maybe Spurs. I mean, if Richarlison had a brain, then he may have scored a couple in the cup against us, but thankfully he doesn't. But other than that, we've just beaten the teams that we really should be beating anyway. got close against Liverpool, who are having their own struggles, which is nice to see. And you know, but the fact is, we've thrown away so many leads this season, getting into a winning position, sometimes against the run of play, the last 2 games case in point, and just sitting back and not going for the jugular, which is, there's only been one game this season where I think, oh, this is like the Newcastle of the last couple of seasons where we could really go on and stick a few past them here, and that was Benfica. I thought, oh, we've got them on the ropes now. This could be 4 or 5. There hasn't been a game like that in the Premier League, not even against Wolves. We could have been 2 down in the first 3 minutes against Wolves, and they've got 2 points. They're a complete mess, and the same with Forest at the time, and Fulham was a struggle.
Well, you never know. You know, Man City could be Elanga's calling card. It definitely, on paper, is the kind of game which would suit them, because Newcastle are going to have less of the ball, and where they're going to have their best chance of hurting City, you would say, would be on the counter, which would suit Elanga perfectly. And that's kind of my biggest concern, is that on Newcastle United moving away from this counter-attacking side that were full of pace, as well as having that high intensity. And if they are, then how does Elanga fit into it? Because for Elanga to be his very best, it is very much absorb and then away you go. Whereas if you've got the ball, you know, it's about the passing, and can you really be a speedy winger in a team that has control of the ball? And I'm not too sure you can. So that's going to really test Eddie Howe, Jason Tindall, Graham Jones, and Elanga as well to work on that and get the best out of him, and maybe a system that doesn't suit him. But the big question is, Sam, is it going to get better? Let's finish off on a positive.
Well, the key thing is, you obviously you should have rephrased that as to say it can't get much worse, can it? It can. It could, because City and Everton, they're nasty little games. I think Marseille will be a wake-up call as well. I think that's a really difficult game. Really difficult. I still think we'll qualify out of the groups, the league phase of the Champions League. I think a win at home against PSV. I think we could nick something at Leverkusen as well. I think the 2 French games will be a massive struggle. And then, you know, you got a couple of decent enough home matches. I mean, if you're not beating Burnley at home, then something is seriously wrong. But, you know, Dubravka will probably have a worldie that day. And then, of course, you got the derby, which is on the horizon as well, which is interesting at this stage. It's a big test for Howe. It's a big test for the squad. It's a big test for Hopkinson and Wilson. It's going to be a huge window, because the ramifications of not qualifying for Europe come the end of the season is huge. We heard what Sandro Tonali had to say. Sven Botman's in contract negotiations. You really think those guys are going to hang around if we don't get any form of European football? I'm not so sure. They might give it an extra year, but it would be a big, big concern in the back of my head.
So is that a no? It's not going to get any better?
I have faith in Howe. I would certainly hope he has learnt from the mistakes in the last 3 or 4 weeks. And look, he's the best Newcastle manager of our lifetime. He's won us the trophy. He's got us 2 Champions League finishes. He's got a tremendous squad to work with. Livramento's not far from coming back. Hall's back. Wissa, who knows? And he is frustrating me already. Some of the decisions he's made, he has to have a look at himself as well, because it's his own fault, in my opinion. But hey ho, he's got a huge role to play, and if he don't, they are protecting him, which is probably the right thing to do, making sure he's not reintroduced back into the side half soaked. So when he is given his debut, he ruddy well better hit the ground running.
Fingers crossed he can do, if only to shut you up, Sam, because that would be wonderful. and can prove you wrong.
Don't go on strike and then go out to that halfway around the world to play 2 pointless international games.
Yes, I know it wasn't the best thing to do, and it's certainly going to be interesting to see what happens come mid-December and whether he heads off to AFCON, but that's something to discuss in a few weeks' time. Thanks to Sam. I mean, I still didn't get a yes or no. Is it going to get better?
Yeah, we'll beat City and Everton, whatever.
Fantastic. Love that. Says something he doesn't quite believe. Or do you believe it? I'm not even going to get into it. Anyway,
we can beat anyone at home. In all seriousness, we can beat anyone at home.
It wouldn't surprise us if they did actually beat Man City and then lost to Everton. It wouldn't surprise any of you guys watching this, and actually, because that is the Newcastle United of today. I'll answer it. Yes, it's going to get better. It will get better if these players on the wings can start picking up a bit of form. I think that will be aided by the return of the fullbacks, and then hopefully the return of Johan Wissa as well. Thank you to you guys for watching and listening. Thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring the podcast. Hit up the link in the podcast description box to take advantage of a special discounted offer on your NordVPN plan. Prices start from, I think it is just £2.36 per month, offering you the best security around, especially while you're browsing on public Wi-Fi. 1 subscription, 10 devices, no risk, with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So support the podcast and keep yourself safe while online. Thanks to Sam. We'll be back next week talking about something, not quite sure what it is. If you've got any suggestions, let us know in the comments and we'll pick out the best. Until then, enjoy the rest of your week and we'll see you guys very soon.